So what's good, TMG fam? It's your boy L, and I'm back with another reaction. How y'all feel? Welcome back to the channel. Salute. Now listen, on tonight's I almost said live PD, bro. Nah, I miss live PD, bro. They just wouldn't let us be great. But audit, shout outs to Audit the Audit, man. We catching up with some more videos, man. And this one here is good cop gets bad cop fired and arrested. Not only fired and arrested, you know what comes with that, man. So we're gonna check it out. If you're new to the channel, man, hit the subscribe button, join the fam. Moment of silence for the haters, that's enough. Now run the lights up. Make sure y'all hit that like button. Dogs sound like they
Welcome to Audit the Audit, where we sort out the who and what and the right and wrong of police interactions. This episode covers use of force, officer obstruction, and official misconduct, and is brought to us by Cameras Everywhere's channel. Be sure to check out the description below and give them the credit that they deserve. On July 26, 2021, Officer David Lance Dukes of the Orangeburg Department of Public Safety responded to a call regarding a man banging on a townhouse door, allegedly with a gun in his waistband. When he arrived on the scene, Officer Dukes immediately drew his gun and ordered 58-year-old disabled man.
Dang, bro, he didn't even let the car stop.
And Clarence Gaillard and his cousin Mario Julian, who were standing in the parking lot outside the townhouse, to the ground.
Hey, let me see your ass. Bro, get on the ground. Get on the ground. Get on the ground right here. Get on the ground. You, Bird and Shark, get on the ground. Over here. On the ground. On the ground. Get on the ground. Do you not listen? Get on the ground.
Mr. Gaillard attempts to comply with Officer Dukes' orders by getting onto his hands and knees, but Officer Dukes forcefully uses his foot to attempt to force Mr. Gaillard all the way to the ground, causing his head to violently hit the pavement. In the 1989 case of Graham versus Conner, the Supreme Court explained that the Fourth Amendment requires a police officer's use of force to be quote-unquote reasonable under the circumstances, and identified 3 factors that courts should consider when determining whether an instance of force was reasonable. These factors include, quote, the severity of the crime at issue, whether the suspect poses an...
Bro, if you go back to that picture, hold on, I just can't get that visual out my head, fam. It looked like he about to stomp his back in. Like he looked like he reared his leg up and was about to drive it through his back. Now, I ain't saying that's what happened, but I'm just saying the visual, the optics of it, all of it from this point looks bad.
And identified 3 factors that courts should consider when determining whether an instance of force was reasonable. These factors include, quote, the severity of the crime at issue, whether the suspect poses an immediate threat to the safety of the officers or others, and whether he is actively resisting arrest or attempting to evade arrest by flight. More recently, in the 2016 case of Armstrong versus Village of Pinehurst, the Fourth Circuit, which includes South Carolina, held that, quote, non-compliance with lawful orders justifies some use of force, but the level of justified force varies based on the risks posed by the resistance. Even purely passive resistance can support the use of some force, but the level of force an individual's resistance will support is dependent on the factual circumstances underlying that resistance. In this situation, the severity of the crime at issue was limited at best, although Officer Dukes claimed to believe that Mr. Gaillard had a gun at the beginning of the interaction. However, at the time Officer Dukes used force against Mr. Gaillard, it was clear that he did not pose an immediate threat, as he had raised both of his empty hands above his head before getting on his hands and knees. Finally, Mr. Gaillard was not resisting arrest in any way. In fact, he was attempting to comply with Officer Dukes' commands when the force was employed. Under these circumstances, it is highly likely that a court would conclude that Officer Dukes' use of force against Mr. Gaillard was neither justified nor reasonable.
Is there a gun back there? By that truck. No gun. You're not listening, dude. Hey, you got a gun on you, man?
No, I ain't got no gun. I don't own no gun.
All right, Michael. Hold on, you watch him say? He had something.
I ain't own no gun.
No, he's right here. Watch him. Go watch him. There it is. That's what he had.
Okay.
All right, who's the complainant? All right, get up. Get him up. 25 cents. Got one time.
Put the leg that way. If you can stand up.
All right, listen. I'm about to help you. Hold on. Hold on. All right, ready? 1, 2, 3. All right.
Yep.
Listen.
Yep, they slammed my head
Listen.
down on the cement. Yep.
Go back inside. Go back in the house. Go back in the house. Ain't nobody talking to you.
I got head trauma.
Go back in the house.
Yeah. Y'all bust my head down. Yeah, I've been in an accident. Yeah, y'all bust my head down. You throw me down.
I sure did.
And,
You wasn't listening.
yeah. No, it ain't. You ain't to throw me down like that. I'm disability.
Okay.
I got head trauma. Yep. You throw me down. Yep. You throw me down.
Now the cop pulls this duct taped up, whatever that was. I want to see it in his hand. Now, if it was in his hand and it kind of looked far back, then okay. But still, when you roll up on him, his hands are empty. When he gets down on the ground, his hands are empty. That's where I have the issue. If you saw that was reason to, okay, have your gun drawn. But then when you get up on him and you see he's not a threat, you know what I'm saying? And he's getting down and his hands are empty, then the extra with the foot to the back and all that is where I got the issue at. Like, but this cop was amped when he got there. Like, you saw the way he rolled up, his hands was already on the door. He was whipping with one hand. Like,
Throw me down. Yep, you bust my head down on the cement. Yep, you bust my head.
All right, let me tell you what happened.
Put my head down on the cement.
He was in front of the car when I came up. He was walking like this. And I thought it was a gun at first. I said, drop the gun, drop the gun, drop the gun, drop the gun. Had him at gunpoint. And he's over here doing something like this.
You slam my head. You slam my
What
head.
he was doing is putting this up behind the tire. So he comes over right here. He got his hands in his pockets. I told him, let me see your hands, let me see your hands, let me see your
Why you
hands.
bust my head then?
He wasn't listening.
No, it ain't.
He got the, like this right here.
You fail me.
And we went on
And
the
then
ground.
you bust my head.
Officer Dukes claims that when Mr. Gaillard was walking from behind the white vehicle, he believed that he had a gun and repeatedly told him to drop it. Officer Dukes also alleges that once Mr. Gaillard stepped in front of the vehicle, he had his hands in his pockets and repeatedly ignored requests to show his hands. However, the body cam footage shows that Mr. Gaillard actually had his hands above his head, and that while Officer Dukes repeatedly screamed at Mr. Gaillard to get on the ground, he never asked him to drop a gun or show his hands, likely because Mr. Gaillard's hands
now he did reach towards right here. All right, his hands up, watch him. Because we're going to go through this and I'm giving everybody the benefit of the doubt, right? So watch, as he's walking forward right
had
now.
his hands above his
Hands above his head.
and that while Officer Dukes repeatedly
Now he reaches down right here.
screamed at Mr. Gaillard to get on the ground, he never asked him to drop a gun or show his
Okay, now that's reason for you to still have your gun out, right? But now you see his hands come back up.
hands,
Hands is back
likely
clean.
because Mr.
It was a split second. So it was long enough for you to keep your gun out because he did go down. So you didn't know. But then he comes back up with his hands
Gaillard's hands were
and you still aggressive. Like,
visible throughout the encounter. An incident report filed by Corporal Brandy Smith, who was also on the scene, states that while Mr. Gaillard was walking from the passenger side of the vehicle, he appeared to have his hands in his pockets, but that once he reached the front of the vehicle, he took his hands out of his pockets. Corporal Smith's report also states that Officer Dukes was giving loud verbal commands for Mr. Gaillard to get on the ground, but makes no mention of a gun or any commands to drop a gun or show his hands. It's also important to note that when Officer Dukes was reporting what happened, he did not explain the method he used to take Mr. Gaillard down. Corporal Smith's report claimed that when Mr. Gaillard did not get completely on the
hold on, y'all. Make sure nobody ain't in my house. Hold on. All right, my bad, y'all. Make sure there's nobody in my house. If somebody was walking past with their dog and they sensed it. But anyway, back to where we was.
Ground. Officer Dukes pushed him to the ground by placing his right foot on the middle of Mr. Gaillard's back. However, the incident report filed by Sergeant Aquel Polidor states that Officer Dukes, quote, jumped up and stomped Mr. Gaillard on the back of his neck with his foot. Although it is unclear from the body camera footage whether Officer Dukes' foot landed on Mr. Gaillard's neck or upper back, it is certain that the version of events Officer Dukes explained to his commanding officer did not align with the body camera footage or the reports filed by his colleagues.
On the cement. Because my
Yeah,
forehead.
your head did hit the cement.
Right. Cause you pushed me down on the cement.
Where's the complaint?
You pushed my head down on the cement.
Right here?
You pushed my head. You pushed my head.
Where's the complaint?
Pushed my head down.
We're trying to get the name of the complainant.
You
So,
pushed my head.
What are we doing? Yes, Sam was gonna check him out.
Ain't nobody
There ain't
in
nothing over here on the press charges on.
Who called?
I'm not sure.
Take him out of cuffs right now. I mean, because that's what we got.
You have to use your force.
Yeah.
No doubt.
Yeah.
Down my head down.
What did that cop just say?
You have to use your force.
Take him out of cuffs right now. I mean, because that's what we
You
got.
have to use your force.
Yeah.
No doubt.
Yeah.
Down my head down.
Dude, I didn't know what
He sound like Boomhauer. I couldn't understand. Down. I couldn't understand what he said, man. One more time.
Take him out of cuffs right now. I mean, because that's what we
You
got.
have to use your force.
Yeah.
No doubt.
Yeah.
Down my head down.
Dude, I didn't know what his
You use
intention
your
was.
force. You need to look your camera.
Mm-hmm.
The officer did wrong. Slam my head down. Push my forehead. Damn right. You gonna pay me for that shit too.
Mayor, I'm going to take that into evidence of what he had. Well, I mean, his, you know, that's the reasons I did what I did. You know what I'm saying? That's where I'm coming from.
No gun or nothing.
Because when he was behind the truck, I couldn't see what he was doing. And I didn't know where
There ain't nothing there.
that went. If it was still in his pockets when he come around that car with his hands in his pockets.
His nose off.
On camera.
Yep, my nose
That's
stick.
fine.
Nose stick.
So he can come out of cuffs?
Yeah. Take him out here.
Yeah, he can come out.
Can y'all tell by the demeanor of every other cop he walk around that they're not agreeing with what he did? Can you also tell by the demeanor of him that he constantly keeps over-explaining himself to each person and they're really not going with what you're saying? I think what old dude was trying to say that I couldn't understand was you didn't have to use excessive force. I think that's what he was saying. But I don't know. I can't really tell. But you can all tell that he's wanting him to. They're going to look at that body cam. I want to know how long he's been on the force. To be that anxious, I got to know how long he's been on the force. To be that anxious, that you know what I mean? I want to see. I want to know. Like, they can't even look at you in the eye right now.
good, how are you? What's going on?
Officer slammed my forehead down in the cement.
Okay.
On the wrong side.
You know what this is?
Yep. Listen.
Can I get a card from you?
I don't have one now. We don't have one. They don't give us cards.
Okay, what's your badge number?
1059.
What's your badge number? My phone. Hold on.
Hold on, we have cards.
I get headache.
Okay.
Thank you.
When Mr. Julian asks Officer Dukes for a business card, Officer Dukes claims they are not issued cards by their department. However, Sergeant Poldador immediately corrects Officer Dukes, states that they do have cards, and provides Mr. Julian with the information he requested. If it was concluded that Officer Dukes intentionally lied to Mr. Julian in an attempt to avoid accountability for his actions, it is possible that he could be convicted of 2 common law crimes under South Carolina law: obstruction of justice and official misconduct. In the 1997 case of State versus Lyles Gray, a court of appeals in South Carolina upheld convictions for both of these offenses against an officer in the Camden Police Department for her conduct during a criminal investigation. The court explained that, quote, under common law obstruction of justice, it is an offense to do any act which prevents, obstructs, impedes, or hinders the administration of justice, and that, quote, misconduct in office occurs when persons in public office fail to properly and faithfully discharge a duty imposed by law. In this situation, the court concluded that the officer obstructed justice and committed misconduct in office by failing to interview witnesses after her daughter was identified as a suspect, obtaining a false arrest warrant for another suspect, and withholding evidence. While Officer Dukes' lie about whether the department issues identification cards did not rise to the same level of misconduct, given the broad definition of both of these offenses, it is still possible that he could be convicted if charged. However, it is important to note that while some states legally require officers to provide ID to citizens upon request, South Carolina law does not place this obligation on officers. Additionally, many police departments have policies requiring that officers identify themselves, but the Orangeburg Department of Public Safety's policy is not publicly available, and it is unclear whether their policy adheres to any form of officer identification guidelines.
Yeah.
Brandon, he can get his stuff off the car.
Just please say badge number.
Typically, no.
After Mr. Gaillard was treated by EMS, he and Mr. Julian were allowed to leave. 2 days after the incident, Officer Dukes was fired from the Orangeburg Department of Public Safety for
Told
violating.
you that don't look good, and look at the way the newspaper ran it. Now, newspapers are dirty, bro. They could have just put, you know what I mean, his mugshot. Yo, they did him dirty. They did him dirty. But anyway, man, I told you that was gonna look bad. That just looks bad. You know what I mean? And we didn't get to see the full video of how it went down, but I'm assuming once they looked at the full video of how it went down, it was enough for them to say, you're fired and charged. That's, whoo. Most of the time you hear them getting fired, but being fired and charged?
the department's use of force policies, which, as stated before, are not publicly.
It said video as South Carolina police officer fired, charged after body cam video shows him stomping on black man's head.
Available. On August 25th, 2021, former Officer Dukes was charged with first-degree assault and battery, which could carry a sentence of up to 10 years in prison. As of the date of this episode, Mr. Gaillard is represented by an attorney, but he has not yet taken any legal action against Officer Dukes or the department. Overall, former Orangeburg Officer Dukes gets an F for physically assaulting Mr. Gaillard for no apparent reason, blatantly lying about the nature of the interaction in his police report, and for making a concerted effort to avoid being held accountable for his ridiculous antics. At no point during this encounter was Mr. Dukes in any danger, and it is clear that his violent actions were motivated by his ego, not officer or civilian safety. There was absolutely no legitimate excuse for shoving Mr. Gaillard's face into the pavement when it was plainly obvious that he was attempting to surrender. And this is exactly the type of conduct that has sparked nationwide unrest regarding members of law enforcement. Mr. Dukes' feeble attempts to explain his actions and manipulate the facts of the encounter only add to his incredulous and insidious behavior, and his conduct was nothing short of unacceptable. I commend the Orangeburg Department of Public Safety for immediately firing Mr. Dukes and pursuing criminal charges against him. And if there were a lower grade than an F, he certainly deserves that. Sergeant Polador gets an A+ for remaining truthful and objective throughout the encounter, ensuring that Mr. Julian was given the necessary information to follow up on the incident, and for maintaining a calm, collected, and professional attitude throughout the interaction. Although it cannot be proven with any degree of certainty, I suspect that Sergeant Polidor was highly involved in the Orangeburg Department's decision to fire and charge Mr. Dukes, and the testimony that she offered in her incident report likely played a vital role in making certain that he was held accountable for his actions. Officers who witness acts of misconduct are often placed in a position where they must consider whether reporting that misconduct is worth the potential damage to their career that could arise from pursuing accountability for the actions of their colleagues. And it is all too common to see members of law enforcement justify the actions of their peers in any way they can to avoid facing the repercussions of speaking out against them. This notion was on full display in this very interaction, when Sergeant Meyer fist-bumped Mr. Dukes for an appropriate use of force, without knowing any of the details beyond what Mr. Dukes had told him. I commend Sergeant Polidor for having the courage and conviction to hold Mr. Dukes accountable for his actions, and I sincerely hope that her actions inspire other officers who witness misconduct to come forward and do the same within their departments. As for Mr. Gaillard and Mr. Julian, I cannot rightfully issue a grade to individuals whose actions were purely dictated by the conduct of the officers on the scene. Nothing the pair did was uncivil, and the two obeyed all the commands of the officers to the best of their ability without knowing the context of the encounter. It could certainly be argued that both Mr. Gaillard and Mr. Julian were both victims of police misconduct, one by way of physical violence, and the other by an attempt to avoid accountability. It should be noted that Mr. Julian made a legitimate effort to gather then Officer Dukes' personnel information, presumably in an effort to file a complaint against him, and I commend him for sensing that Mr. Dukes' actions were unlawful and doing what he could to hold him accountable. Let us know if there's an interaction or legal.
So, like I said, several things, man. Number one, like he was saying, it's you normally see the police officer stick up for their own. So the fact that she stepped out there and was like, nah, he was wrong, you just don't see that often. Salute to her for that. We didn't get to see the video. I tried to give him every benefit, but even in that, he still was super wrong, bro. Because like I said, when he reached down, I was like, all right, that's room for you to still have your gun out. You know what I mean? And to be cautious. But then he threw his hands back up and it was nothing in it. You relax back down, bro. This is great training for the police department because it shows, man, if you can't do this job, bro, and maintain a level head, then this is not the job for you. And we got to weed out the bad people. You cannot be in this type of position and not be able to keep a cool head and react under pressure. If you can't do that for this job, then you don't need to be a police officer, bro. Number two, the people stuck their head out the door of the apartment that they went to, and they said, he's got a gash or a knot or something, he's bleeding from the head. Does he need EMS? He was too busy shouting at them to get back in the house to be concerned for the person he was arresting, the older gentleman, I forget his name. He was too busy worried about them getting back in the house and getting over to whatever weapon to make sure that he radioed to get EMS. It took the other officer to call EMS. Like, it's several things that was wrong with this situation. And you could tell by his demeanor that he knew he was wrong. He knew he was wrong. You know what I mean? Shout outs to Audit for the video. Y'all get at me, let me know what you think. Did you see it differently than I did? Let's debate about it. I'm out.